When I was in seminary, I had to do a course called CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education, or basically an internship in a hospital-type setting. It was a painful class. Not because of the ministry opportunity, I enjoyed that, but it was the weekly debriefing sessions that were just so brutal. It was a small group setting where we would workshop how to do ministry. And there was all sorts of things thrown in there. But I was with a number of Church of Christ seminarians whose view on ministry was entirely different from what I was learning how to do. I always wore clericals during seminary. It was, the uniform of how I would be going out into the world to do ministry after seminary. And plus, it was one of the few times where I actually got to wear them. I had a little skunk stripe on there to prove to other people in collars that I wasn't a collar. I had to explain it to a few people. No, I'm not ordained. And so anyway, but I actually got to wear it, and so I loved wearing clericals. And but the main reason was to get used to doing ministry in such a thing. Get used to people looking to me as the church having come visit them. One time in one of these little sessions, one of the other people asked me why I wore clericals all the time. He thought I was doing it because I thought I was better than him. My response was, "What's the first thing that you have to do when you enter a room?" He says, "Well, every time I enter a room, I say, 'Hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm here on behalf of Vitas. I'm a Vitas chaplain.'" I said, "I never have to say that. I walk in, and the first thing they said, 'Oh, chaplain's here. Yes, I need you. No, I don't.'" It cuts through all of this because they know what the role of a chaplain is, as opposed to what are you, person in a business, just another person in a business suit doing here? I don't know who you are. Very rarely did I have to identify myself as a chaplain of Vitas. It just identified who I was, what I was there for, and all they had to do was to decide whether or not they wanted to utilize my services. In my line of work, identifying as a church is extremely beneficial. In fact, there are regular occurrences when people will come up to me needing to talk about spiritual things in the grocery store, in an airport, all sorts of things. People come up to me because they know I am an ordained clergyman. It's the uniform, so they know exactly where to go. The only problem with this is that I don't get to sneak up on people anymore. I've lost my covert operation ability because I am now a uniformed officer. If you talk to most priests, the fact that they don't get to have normal conversations with people is something that we all look at as something that we don't necessarily look at in jealousy, though maybe a little. It's definitely with nostalgia. I remember when I could walk into a conversation and I didn't always have to talk about theology. I love talking about theology, but sometimes I want to talk about, the Cowboys. It's just kind of how that goes. It's the unexpectedness of being a Christian, being just a normal person. You're like, "Oh, I didn't know that you were a Christian." There's something different. It's these conversations that leads to ministry, not necessarily the role of a priest. Is one of the roles of the ministry of the laity, being that Christian out in the world that people can see there's something different about you. What is it? And you get to then inform them. Loud and proud is the role of the clergy. "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." But the role of the laity is actually more like the role of the Samaritan in the gospel lesson today. No one expected the Samaritan to provide for the man who fell among robbers, yet that is exactly what he did. The expected ministry was supposed to come from the priest and the Levite, but the one who actually provided for the man was the Samaritan, the one who was entirely unexpected. The priest and the Levite are the established clergy roles in the second temple time period of Jerusalem. Second temple because the first one was destroyed in 587 BC by the Babylonians when they conquered the kingdom of Judea and then sent the inhabitants into exile. The second temple was then built when the Jews returned from exile under the Persians around 515 and built this second temple. This temple was then destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. And it's different than Judaism is today because in modern Judaism, there is no temple, so the priesthood system does not apply. But all that being said, the two roles are essentially what we considered to be the priest and deacon of the Judaism world. In the parable, these two roles had become too focused in their roles in the sacrifices of the temple, to the point where even though they saw a person in dire need of their help as human beings, they were too narrowly focused on remaining ritually unclean in order to perform the task given to them by God. This is one of the major problems Jesus seeks to correct in the ministry portion of his life. The tail had been wagging the dog for far too long. The sacrifices were being offered for the sole sake of being offered, for the sole sake of the sacrifice itself, and not as an aid to help turn the hearts of the people to their God. And Jesus was very critical of this. But once Jesus' ministry ends and he rises from the grave and establishes the church, that this parable confronting this problem ceased to be of use, seemingly. This is one of the beautiful things about parables, however. Put the same parable in a different context and it can speak to a different issue. One of the things that I noticed in looking at this parable this week is that it is very easily an insight into the life and work of Jesus, who came down to confront the fact that the established system had failed in its task of ministering to the spiritual situation of the very people it had been charged to minister to. They were there they lay, half dead in a ditch, waiting for the establishment to come and nurse them back to health. But they could not. They would not. And Jesus, in an unexpected person, comes to do what they would not do. So the spiritual position of the victim is very much relevant to the Christian church today. This spiritually half-dead person laying there dying, waiting for someone to come to help them out. And it would not take much to show the essential role of the Samaritan in the life of the church. For today, though, the priests and the Levites pass by on the other side of the road in this parable, but it may not necessarily be because of a dereliction of duty, but more, I think, if we look at it in the eyes of today, it may be from the fact that they are seen as the enemy to most people in the world today. And they're just told that they just keep on walking. I don't want you to come over here because I am not spiritually dead. But the Samaritan, on the other hand, comes unexpectedly. He comes as someone who's seemingly in the same position as them. I too am spiritually dead. Let me show you to this new thing. And this is essential in the role of the laity. And one of the things that is often misunderstood by the Christian church, especially in our denomination. In our denomination, we tend to leave the ministry to the professional Christian, the one who has to put on the uniform and go out in the world and be the face of Christianity, be the face of the denomination in this city. But this mentality muddles all the roles so that we tend to ordain and attempt to validate a person who may not necessarily have a call to sacerdotal ministry or ordained or diaconal ministry, and then they are ruined and discouraged for what may have been actually a very fruitful lay ministry. So let's take a moment and define the roles. The ministry of a priest is to provide the sacramental duties of the church: baptism, Eucharist, reconciliation, marriage, and unction. All the other roles of, say, a rector, all of these are ancillary, things that we also do, but are not actually essential to the role of the priest. Now, technically, all of these other things, the ministry roles that I have, the paperwork, and all the things, the Bible studies, all of these things can actually be done by laymen. The deacon's role is to assist the priest in the sacramental roles of the church, but it's also it's to be, more importantly, to be a person who discerns the needs of the people in the world as a whole. The role of the laity would be to assist the deacon in this second role, and actually to be the evangelistic arm of the church, to be the ones who get to know people on an individual basis, and to know and then identify a person's personal needs, and to begin the process of bringing that person to faith in Jesus Christ. In my life, looking back, I never really got a chance to understand the role of the ministry of the laity while I was in it. I knew it theoretically, and I didn't get to appreciate it while I was in it, however. But then again, I never got really a chance to understand the role and appreciate the role when I was ordained as a deacon. I now understand it, and I appreciate it in all of these things, and I continue to be a deacon so I can do all of those things, just like I can continue to do all the things as a layman or in the priesthood of all believers. I get to do all of those things. But if I were to function solely in the role of this priesthood of all believers and solely in the role of deacon, I wouldn't be fulfilling the role that I was called to as in sacramental ministry. I can function in those things, but it would be more like me functioning without an essential instrument. And I'm sure Deacon Mike would say the same thing. He could function solely as a role and as a layman, but his ministry would be missing something. But to ordain him as a priest and to require him to function in this manner would be something he could do, but it would be like making someone who faints at the sight of blood become a surgeon. Yes, he could do it, but it's not necessarily something that he's called to do, because that's just not his calling. He's called to something else. The ministry of the laity is absolutely essential to the ministry of the church, because you all get to go places where we do not, or at least in ways that we are not able to go. Deacon Mike and I are called to be overt ministers, to minister to people in ways that the world understands that a church should be doing, and that if the church is not doing those things, it is failing to do its ministry. But you all are called to covert ministry, to ministry that seems unexpected because you have the ability to do it as one of them, to go and swim among the fishes as a fish until they understand that the fish that you are is the Christian. To those who are not in the know, you can seem like just another person who is spiritually half dead, just like the rest. But then you can show them that this is not the case, in a way that makes sense to them, that speaks to them in their context specifically. You are the evangelistic arm of the church as it seeks out the last, the lost, and the least. In another parable, it says, a man gives a banquet and invites many, but they would not come. Each who would not come gives an excuse. I have to do this or that thing, so I cannot come. So a man sends out his servants. To one he says, go out quickly to the streets and the lanes of the city and bring in the poor and crippled, the blind and the lame. And when he does this, he tells his master, what you have commanded I have done, and there is still more room. So he says to another servant, go out to the highways and hedges and compel people to come in, that my house shall be filled. This is the ministry of the church. The priest is there to provide the banquet. The deacon then goes to bring in the underserved, the people who the church would not be doing the work of the church if they were neglected. But there is still room for others. And it is the task of the laity to be sure that these hedges and highways are scoured, and then to compel these people to come to the banquet. So your task is to be the undercover agents of the church, and to infiltrate into areas that, especially in this day of age, the church cannot gain entry, so that through your unexpected ministry to them, they may see the kindness of Christ as he seeks to meet them in their brokenness and then nurse them back to health and fullness of life. By virtue of your baptism into Christ, you have been ordained to this role. But if we were to recognize this by slapping on a collar on each and every one of you, and you would no longer be able to perform your task as you have been called. This is a task that cannot be done by Deacon Mike or myself, because it requires your unique gifts and your unique situation. And it is absolutely essential to the ministry of the church. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.